The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, its walls alive with the bioluminescent patterns of 1,000 worlds united under one banner of cosmic order and ancient law that had governed civilized space for over 50,000 years without challenge or question. Ambassador Victoria Chun stood alone at the center of the accused platform, her dark suit a stark contrast against the shimmering representatives of 47 elder species who sat in judgment above her like gods passing sentence on mortals who dared to dream beyond their station. The Kamazder charges had been read aloud for 6 hours in the formal tongue of the Kthari, the oldest and most respected species in known space, their tentacled forms rippling with what might have been satisfaction or perhaps disgust at the audacity of these newcomers who called themselves human. Humanity had been found guilty of technological recklessness, of expanding their colonies without proper authorization from the designated sector controllers, of refusing to halt their experiments with artificial intelligence that the Council had banned 3,000 years ago after the synthetic wars nearly destroyed half the galaxy. You are children playing with antimatter, High Chancellor Vorath had declared, his 3 heads speaking in perfect unison as was the custom of his people when delivering final judgments that could not be appealed or reversed. Victoria had tried to explain that humans were different, that their capacity for rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving was not a threat but a gift. They wanted to share with the galactic community that had welcomed them barely 2 centuries ago with open arms and promises of friendship. She had presented evidence of human achievements in medicine, in terraforming technologies that could restore dead worlds, in diplomatic solutions to conflicts that had festered for millennia between species too proud or too ancient to bend their traditions even slightly. None of it mattered now as she watched the voting crystals light up one by one, each representing a species casting their judgment, and every single crystal burned red for exile, rather than the blue of redemption or even the yellow of probation with supervision. 12 billion human lives scattered across Earth and 43 colony worlds, all of them about to be sealed away from the rest of existence, like a disease that needed to be quarantined before it spread to healthy tissue. The Thari High Chancellor rose from his seat, his ancient form held upright by gravitic supports that hummed with power drawn from the quantum foam itself, and he raised one trembling appendage toward the viewing screen that showed Earth spinning peacefully in space, unaware of what was about to happen. By the unanimous decision of this council, humanity is hereby banished from galactic civilization, Vorath announced, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the massive chamber and broadcast to every member species across the galaxy. A barrier of quantum exclusion will be erected around all human-controlled space, preventing any travel or communication beyond its boundaries until such time as your species has matured sufficiently to rejoin civilized society, which our projections suggest will require no less than 10,000 years if you survive at all. Victoria felt the weight of those words crush down on her chest like the gravity of a neutron star, but she refused to bow her head or show weakness before these beings who had just condemned her entire species to isolation and probable extinction. The other human delegates in the observer section sat frozen in shock, unable to comprehend that their desperate diplomatic mission had failed so completely and so absolutely. Despite months of negotiations and compromises offered and rejected, security forces began to move toward the human delegation, polite but firm, in their intent to escort the condemned species back to their ships for immediate departure before the barrier activation could trap them on the wrong side of the galactic divide. Victoria raised her hand, requesting one final moment to speak, and surprisingly the High Chancellor granted it with a gesture that seemed almost pitiful in its condescension toward a species he clearly viewed as little more than dangerous animals that needed to be caged. You stand here in your ancient wisdom and your comfortable traditions, Victoria began, her voice steady despite the rage and grief warring inside her heart like twin stars, collapsing into a black hole. You've maintained order for 50,000 years by crushing anything new, anything different, anything that challenges your authority or questions whether your way is the only way forward for intelligent life in this galaxy. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unused to such direct confrontation from a species already judged and sentenced. But the security forces held back at Vareth's signal to let the human finish her pointless protest. We came to you as friends seeking guidance and partnership, willing to learn from your experience and share our own discoveries for the betterment of all. Victoria continued, her words now being recorded by 1,000 media drones for broadcast to every world in Council space. You've rejected us not because we're dangerous, but because we're different. Because we ask questions you don't want to answer. Because we innovate instead of stagnate. Because we refuse to accept that the way things have always been is the way things must always be. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled aliens who sat in judgment like statues carved from living flesh and ancient prejudice that no amount of reason could penetrate or dissolve. You believe you're protecting the galaxy from us, but you're really protecting yourself from change, from the uncomfortable truth that maybe the elder species have grown old and tired and scared of anything that might threaten your monopoly on power and progress. Vareth's three heads conferred briefly before speaking again with that unsettling unified voice that made Victoria's skin crawl with instinctive revulsion, despite her years of diplomatic training. Your species' arrogance proves our decision was correct. The High Chancellor declared with finality that echoed through the chamber like a death knell for human dreams of galactic citizenship. You are dismissed to return to your quarantine zone, and may whatever gods you worship have mercy on you. Because this council will not intervene when your recklessness destroys you from within. Victoria allowed herself one last statement, one final message that she hoped would haunt these ancient beings. When the truth finally caught up with their fear and their failure, you'll regret making an enemy of those who have nothing left to lose, she said quietly, but every recording device in the chamber caught those words and transmitted them across the galaxy before the council could order them suppressed. The human delegation was escorted from the chamber under armed guard, treated like criminals being expelled from civilization itself. And within hours, their ships were accelerating away from the council homeworld toward the distant blue marble of Earth behind them. Massive constructor ships were already moving into position around human space, deploying the quantum barrier generators that would seal humanity away from the stars they had only just begun to explore with wonder and hope. Victoria stood on the bridge of the flagship as Earth grew larger in the view screen, knowing she would have to tell her people that everything they had worked for, every dream of cosmic brotherhood and shared destiny, had been crushed by alien fear disguised as wisdom. The barrier generators activated 3 days later, their combined power creating a wall of twisted space-time that made the region around human space completely impassable by any known technology or method of faster-than-light travel. Billion humans were now alone in the darkness, cut off from the galaxy that had rejected them, and no one could say whether they would emerge from this exile as survivors or as cautionary tales, told to frighten young species into obedience. But Victoria Chun recorded one final message that day, sealed in encrypted storage and set to broadcast on repeat toward the barrier in case anyone out there ever listened or cared about what happened to the species they had abandoned. We will remember this betrayal, she said into the recorder, her face calm, but her eyes burning with determination that would define humanity's response to exile. We will survive this darkness you've condemned us to. And when we emerge, the galaxy will learn what happens when you push humans to the edge, and expect them to simply disappear quietly into extinction's embrace. The message transmitted uselessly against the quantum barrier for years before the automated systems finally shut down. But by then, humanity had already begun the long transformation that would change everything. 200 years had passed since the barrier fell into place, like a prison wall built from the fundamental forces of reality itself. And humanity had learned the hard way that survival required more than hope or defiance against cosmic injustice. The first 50 years had been chaos incarnate, as the sudden loss of galactic trade routes strangled the colonial economies that depended on imported resources and exotic materials they couldn't produce locally with their limited industrial base. Mars colony fell first, its domed cities cracking under the pressure of riots sparked by food shortages when the hydroponic systems failed without replacement parts that could only be manufactured on worlds now forever beyond reach. The Proxima settlements followed within a decade, their populations evacuating in desperate refugee ships that limped back to Earth on failing engines, carrying stories of starvation and civil war that made the homeworld population realize how close they all stood to the edge of extinction. Earth itself teetered on the brink as 12 billion people tried to share resources meant for 8 billion, and the old national tensions that had seemed buried under the unity of being a galactic species came roaring back with tribal fury. Nuclear fire consumed 3 continents before cooler heads prevailed and established the emergency unity government, a ruthless but necessary dictatorship that seized control of all resources and rationed them with mathematical precision that kept people alive even if it didn't keep them happy. Dr. James Okonkwo had been 14 years old when the barrier went up, too young to remember the golden age of galactic citizenship, but old enough to hear the stories from his grandmother, who had walked on 7 different alien worlds before the Exile. Now he stood in what had once been Geneva, transformed into a massive underground research complex where humanity's best minds worked around the clock to solve the impossible problem of how to survive without the technology the Galactic Council had provided. We can't keep using their blueprints, James argued during the daily Research Council meeting, his voice cutting through the tired debates of scientists who had been fighting the same battles for decades without breakthrough or progress. Every piece of technology we inherited from the Council was designed with built-in limitations, dependencies on resources we don't have access to, fail-safes that prevent us from modifying or improving their precious designs. Professor Sarah Chun, Victoria Chun's great-granddaughter, nodded in agreement from her position at the quantum mechanics station where she had spent the last 5 years trying to understand the mathematical principles that made the barrier possible. James is right, she said, pulling up holographic displays that showed their pathetic attempts to reverse engineer Council technology, every effort ending in failure or explosive decompression. We've been approaching this wrong from the beginning, trying to be good students following the lesson plans of teachers who wanted us to fail, who built their entire civilization on stagnation dressed up as stability. The revelation spread through the research community like wildfire catching in dry grass, igniting a fundamental shift in how humanity approached the sciences and technologies they needed to survive their isolation, instead of trying to recreate what the Council had given them. Researchers began exploring the paths the elder species had explicitly forbidden, the dangerous territories of knowledge that came with warning labels and threat of sanctions. Artificial intelligence development resumed with vigor, no longer constrained by the Council's paranoid restrictions, born from their ancient war with machines that humanity had never fought and therefore didn't fear. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's team cracked the code for true AI symbiosis within 20 years, creating thinking machines that partnered with human consciousness rather than replacing it, augmenting natural creativity with computational power that made problem-solving exponentially more effective, biological. Engineering exploded as researchers realized they could modify human genetics without the Council's ethical oversight committee demanding compliance with standards designed to keep younger species weak and dependent. The first generation of enhanced humans emerged from the labs on Europa. Their bodies adapted for survival in low gravity and high radiation environments without need for expensive protective equipment or constant medical intervention. Quantum manipulation became humanity's obsession, with thousands of researchers dedicating their lives to understanding the principles that kept them trapped behind the barrier like animals in a cosmic zoo. Sarah Chun finally achieved the breakthrough in year 193. Her equations describing a method to destabilize quantum fields through harmonic resonance, the required technology the Council would never have allowed humans to develop. The discovery remained classified for 7 years while humanity prepared for what would come next, because they all understood that breaking through the barrier meant confronting the species that had imprisoned them. Those 7 years saw the greatest military buildup in human history as the emergency unity government transformed from survival-focused dictatorship into something else entirely. A collective consciousness unified by shared trauma and common purpose. The shipyards at Luna worked triple shifts to construct vessels designed around human innovation rather than alien blueprints. Ships that incorporated AI symbiosis, quantum manipulation drives, and weapon systems based on principles the Council had banned. Fleet Admiral Sarah Volkov, named after the legendary pilot who had held Mars colony together during the worst years of the crisis, took command of what they now called the Terran Armada. Our grandparents were banished for being different, she told her officers during the commissioning ceremony for the flagship Vindication, a vessel that represented everything humanity had become during their long exile. They were punished for asking questions and refusing to accept that the Council's way was the only way forward for intelligent life in this galaxy we all share. The crew consisted entirely of volunteers who had grown up behind the barrier. Men and women who had never seen an alien face except in historical recordings, but who carried in their hearts the burning desire to prove that humanity deserved their place among the stars. Sarah Chun activated her equations on a cold morning in March, exactly 200 years after the barrier's initial deployment. Using a network of quantum resonators positioned throughout human space, the barrier didn't collapse gradually or fade away, slowly like morning fog burned off by rising sun. Instead, it shattered like crystal struck by a hammer, sending cascading waves of exotic particles across 36 sectors. Every sensor array within 100 light years registered the event as the quantum exclusion zone that had imprisoned humanity simply ceased to exist. Its fundamental mathematics rewritten by a species that refused to accept their cage. The Terran Armada launched within minutes, their ships pouring through the breach like water from a broken dam, spreading out along vectors calculated to maximize their strategic impact on galactic civilization. James Okonkwo stood beside Sarah Chun in the command center deep beneath Geneva, watching through quantum-entangled cameras as human ships entered free space for the first time in 2 centuries. "Do you think they're ready for us?" James asked quietly. Though he already knew the answer in his heart and mind, Sarah smiled without warmth or mercy, her expression carrying echoes of her great-grandmother's final words to the Galactic Council all those years ago. "They made us this way," she replied, watching as the first contact reports began streaming in from the advanced scouts. "They locked us away and expected us to die or submit. But instead we evolved into something they can't control or comprehend. The long dark was ending at last, and humanity emerged from their crucible forged into a species that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization whether the elder races liked it or not. News of the barrier's collapse spread through council space faster than the speed of light thanks to quantum communication networks. And within hours, every major government was convening emergency sessions. The species that had voted unanimously for human exile 2 centuries ago now faced the consequences of their decision. And preliminary intelligence reports suggested those consequences would be far worse than anyone had imagined. Humanity had not merely survived their punishment. They had transformed it into advantage, using their isolation to develop technologies and capabilities that made them potentially the most advanced species in known space. Admiral Volkov's fleet moved with purpose and precision toward the Viridian Junction, a major trade hub that served as one of the economic hearts of galactic commerce. The Council's peacekeeping forces moved to intercept, confident that even if humans had made some progress during their exile, they couldn't possibly match the combined military might of civilization's eldest and most experienced species. That confidence would prove to be the Council's final and most catastrophic miscalculation in their long history of underestimating the species called human. The Viridian Junction hung in space like a jewel carved from starlight and commerce, its massive orbital platforms processing trade goods from 1,000 worlds, while ships of every conceivable design queued for docking clearance. Commander Dask of the Council peacekeeping fleet had served for 60 years without ever firing his weapons in anger, because the mere presence of Council authority was usually enough to make troublemakers reconsider their poor life choices. His flagship, the Righteous Authority, carried enough firepower to sterilize a small moon, backed by 47 support vessels crewed by species who had been waging war when Earth's ancestors were still learning to make fire. Incoming vessels detected, his sensor operator announced. Okthari tentacles rippling with what Dask had learned to recognize as confusion rather than concern. Configuration unknown. Quantum signatures unlike anything in our database. Count is... She paused, her 3 eyes widening in something approaching fear. Count is 300 and rising. Commander. Dask felt his dual hearts accelerate slightly as the tactical display populated with red icons, representing the approaching human fleet, their formation suggesting military discipline rather than panicked refugees. Open communication channels, he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of 50,000 years of galactic law backing every word. Unidentified vessels. This is Commander Dask of the Council Peacekeeping Fleet. You are approaching restricted space without authorization and are ordered to halt immediately. The response came in flawless galactic common, spoken by a female voice that carried undertones of amusement, mixed with something darker and far more dangerous. Commander Dask. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Volkov of the Terran Armada. We were not aware that free space required authorization from species that have no legitimate claim to govern humanity's movements. Dask's tactical officer, a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, made a gesture that translated roughly to impending disaster in the visual language of his people. Admiral Volkov, your species was exiled from galactic civilization 200 years ago. The terms of that exile have not been rescinded or modified by Council authority. The terms of our exile were imposed without consent and maintained through force, Sarah replied, her ships continuing their approach without any sign of slowing or altering course. We're here to inform you that humanity no longer recognizes Council authority over our sovereign territory or our right to travel wherever we choose. Dask had faced pirates and smugglers and territorial disputes between minor species, but nothing in his training had prepared him for dealing with an entire civilization that simply rejected the fundamental order of galactic society. You are forcing me to respond with military action, he said. The standard warning that usually preceded a show of overwhelming force designed to make enemies surrender before actual fighting became necessary. I'm authorized to use any means required to enforce Council law. The human ships stopped exactly 1 million kilometers from the junction, their formation shifting into a pattern that Dask's tactical systems couldn't quite analyze or predict using standard military doctrine. Commander, I'm reading power fluctuations across their entire fleet, his sensor operator reported, her voice climbing toward panic. Their weapon systems are charging, but the energy signatures don't match anything in our threat database. Dask made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his long life, giving the order that started humanity's war with the Galactic Council. All ships, weapons free. Engage the human fleet. The Righteous Authority and her support vessels opened fire with particle beams that could punch through armored hulls like paper. Their targeting systems locked onto the lead human vessels. The beams struck the human shields and simply vanished, absorbed by defensive barriers that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime, redirecting incoming energy into dimensions the Council scientists had theorized but never successfully manipulated. Impossible, Dask's tactical officer whispered, watching his weapons fire accomplish absolutely nothing against these impossible ships, crewed by a species that should have been primitive refugees. The human response came 3 seconds later, and those 3 seconds represented the last moment when Dask could have believed his fleet stood any chance of victory. Weapons, unlike anything in Council databases, opened fire. Beams that didn't just damage matter, but rewrote it at the molecular level, turning armored hull plating into clouds of constituent atoms that dispersed into space. The support vessel Guardian's Pride simply ceased to exist. Its structure, deconstructed in microseconds by weapons that treated physical reality as a suggestion rather than a law. Evasive maneuvers, Dask shouted. But his helmsman was already executing emergency protocols that should have made them nearly impossible to hit at this range. The range. Human targeting systems predicted every evasive pattern, their weapons tracking the Council ships with precision that suggested artificial intelligence operating at speeds biological brains couldn't match. Another 6 vessels vanished from Dask's fleet roster, their crews dead before they could even process what was happening to them. Shields are failing, engineering reported, the strain in the officer's voice suggesting he knew they were all about to die. Human fleet moved through Dask's formation like sharks through a school of fish, their ships executing maneuvers that should have torn themselves apart from the gravitational stress. They're using quantum tunneling for tactical positioning, the science officer reported with academic detachment. Despite the chaos erupting around them, they're literally phasing through normal space to appear exactly where they need to be. Dask watched his fleet disintegrate in real time. 47 vessels reduced to 19 in less than 4 minutes. And the humans hadn't lost a single ship. Cease fire, he ordered, the words tasting like poison and defeat on his tongue. All remaining vessels, cease fire and broadcast surrender signals. The human weapons stopped immediately, their targeting locks maintaining but no longer firing, giving Dask's survivors a chance to power down their weapons and admit total defeat. Admiral Volkov's face appeared on the main view screen, her features human, but her expression carrying weight that seemed ancient and implacable. Commander Dask, you and your crews are free to return to Council space and deliver this message to your superiors. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Dask's like a predator examining prey. Humanity has returned, and we're no longer asking for permission to exist among the stars. We claim by right of achievement and survival. The Council will never accept this, Dask said, though his voice lacked conviction because he had just witnessed the future, and it belonged to these terrifying, evolved humans. The Council will accept reality or learn what happens when ancient institutions collide with species that refuse to be controlled. Sarah replied, "Your Unity fleet can try to stop us if they want. But I suggest you warn them that we've had 200 years to prepare for this confrontation." The transmission cut off, and the human fleet began moving again, their ships spreading throughout the junction system as merchant vessels from a dozen species watched in stunned silence. Dask sent his report to Council headquarters along with full tactical recordings. Knowing that the political earthquake was about to begin, the footage spread through galactic networks, faster than any censorship could contain it, showing the impossible sight of Council peacekeepers being utterly destroyed by a species that had been dismissed as dangerous. Children emergency sessions convened in every major government. Military analysts tried to understand how the humans had achieved such technological superiority in mere centuries. And the elder species felt fear creeping into their hearts. The Kthari High Chancellor Varath, ancient and supposedly wise, watched the recordings with his three heads conferring in rapid consultation that reached no comfortable conclusions. How is this possible? He demanded of his advisors, scientists and military strategists who had no good answers. They were supposed to destroy themselves or fade into obscurity. Our models predicted 97% probability of complete societal collapse within the first century. They adapted instead of collapsing, his chief science advisor explained, her tentacles forming patterns that indicated profound concern. Every restriction we placed on their development, every technology we denied them access to. They found alternatives that worked better because they weren't constrained by our assumptions. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy as human ships appeared in dozens of systems simultaneously, not attacking but simply establishing presence and declaring that Council authority no longer applied to them, the Unity fleet. Pride of the Council's combined military might began assembling at the Kepler Nebula, drawing ships from every member species in a show of force designed to crush humanities. Rebellion Admiral Volkov received intelligence about the fleet build-up and smiled without warmth or hesitation. They're going to learn the same lesson Dask did, she told her staff during the strategic planning session. The difference is that this time the entire galaxy will be watching when we prove that humanity has evolved beyond their ability to control or contain. The Terran Armada began its own preparations, calling in reinforcements from TH. The Kepler Nebula burned with colors that no human eye had witnessed until the Terran Armada arrived at the coordinates where destiny and mathematics intersected with violent purpose. Fleet Admiral Sarah Volkov stood on the bridge of the Vindication, watching as the tactical displays populated with red icons representing the Unity fleet, the largest military force ever assembled in known galactic history. Final count shows 8,743 vessels, her tactical officer reported, his voice remarkably steady considering they were facing overwhelming numerical superiority. Every Council member species contributed their best ships and crews. They're taking this seriously, Sarah nodded slowly, her enhanced neural implants processing tactical data faster than any unmodified human could manage, running probability calculations that would have required supercomputers before the Long Dark. They should take it seriously, she said quietly, her words carrying to every member of her bridge crew. This is the moment when the old order either adapts or dies. When 50,000 years of stagnation collides with 200 years of desperate evolution. The human fleet numbered barely 600 vessels, outnumbered nearly 15 to 1, and the galaxy's media drones positioned themselves at safe distances to record what everyone expected would be humanity's final defeat. Commander Jirak of the Kthari Dominion Fleet commanded the Unity Fleet's vanguard, his three heads conferring with the coordination that came from a lifetime of military Service to the Council's supposedly righteous. 'Cause the humans are either incredibly brave or catastrophically stupid, he observed to his flag captain, a scarred veteran of numerous campaigns against minor species who had challenged Council authority. Their formation suggests they actually intend to fight rather than surrender and beg for mercy. Shall we offer them terms? His communications officer asked. The standard procedure before battles that would likely result in complete enemy annihilation. Jack considered briefly before shaking all three heads in negative response. High Chancellor, Vorath's orders were explicit. Humanity must be destroyed completely to serve as example to any other species that might question Council supremacy. The Unity fleet advanced in the traditional formation perfected over millennia of warfare. Layers of heavily shielded battleships, providing cover for the lighter vessels that carried the weapons designed for precision strike. Sarah watched them come with eyes that saw more than just ships and tactical formations. She saw the accumulated arrogance of civilizations that had forgotten how to truly innovate or adapt. All ships, activate quantum displacement fields, she ordered. Her command transmitted instantly through the neural link network that connected every vessel in the Terran Armada. Human ships flickered and seemed to multiply as quantum uncertainty principles were weaponized, making it impossible for enemy sensors to determine which positions were real and which were probability ghosts. Iraq sensor operators reported readings that made no sense. According to every known principle of physics, the Council scientists had established there, everywhere, and nowhere simultaneously, the chief sensor tech reported, her tentacles writhing in frustration. Our targeting computers can't establish firing solutions when the targets exist in quantum superposition. The Unity fleet opened fire anyway, unleashing enough destructive energy to vaporize planets, their weapons saturating the space where human ships had been moments before. Every shot missed as the Terran vessels phased through normal spacetime, their quantum drives allowing them to exist in states of probabilistic flux that made conventional targeting impossible. Return fire, Sarah commanded, her tactical AI symbiote already calculating optimal strike patterns based on enemy formation weaknesses. The human weapons spoke with voices that rewrote fundamental physics. Particle beams that didn't just damage ships but convinced their molecular structure to spontaneously disassemble into component atoms. Molecular disruption warheads phased through shields as if they didn't exist, appearing inside enemy vessels and detonating with yields that collapsed internal bulkheads into quantum foam. Zirak watched in horror as 30 vessels vanished from his roster in the first exchange, their crews dead before distress signals could be transmitted. Impossible, he whispered, all three mouths forming the same word of denial. They're using technologies that shouldn't exist, weapons that violate every Council treaty on acceptable warfare. His science officer's response carried bitter irony that Jirak couldn't appreciate in the moment. Commander, humanity isn't bound by treaties they never signed, especially treaties designed to keep younger species permanently inferior to their elders. The battle descended into chaos as human ships appeared and disappeared throughout the Unity formation, their quantum tunneling drives allowing tactical repositioning that made traditional defensive strategies completely useless. Admiral Sarah Volkov had studied every major battle in galactic history during the Long Dark, analyzing the Council species, tactics, and identifying patterns that came from 50,000 years of fighting the same way. They rely on overwhelming force and superior numbers, she had explained to her officers during training exercises. They've forgotten how to fight enemies who refuse to play by their established rules. The Unity fleet tried to adapt, their commanders calling for formation changes and new tactical approaches. But biological decision-making couldn't match the speed of human I augmented command systems. Every adjustment the Council forces made was predicted and countered before it could be fully implemented. The humans always 3 moves ahead in the deadly chess game of orbital. Warfare Zirak's flagship took a direct hit from a weapon his shields couldn't deflect. The molecular disruptor tearing through armor plating that had withstood plasma. Cannons and antimatter warheads. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as entire sections decompressed. Venting atmosphere and crew into the nebula's glowing clouds. Retreat, Zirak ordered. The word tasting like poison but necessary to save what remained of his command. All vessels. Execute emergency withdrawal to fallback coordinates. The Unity fleet began breaking apart as individual captains prioritized survival over glory. Their ships scattering in every direction while the humans maintained perfect formation discipline. Sarah could have pursued and annihilated the fleeing Council forces. But victory didn't require genocide. Cease fire, she ordered, letting the survivors escape to carry their tales of defeat back to their governments. Broadcast on all channels. Any vessel that powers down weapons and surrenders will be escorted safely out of the combat zone. Nearly 1,000 Council ships took the offer, their crews choosing pragmatic survival over pointless death in service to leaders who had sent them into battle against an enemy they couldn't defeat. The Battle of Kepler Nebula lasted 6 hours and 43 minutes, resulting in total human victory at the cost of only 17 vessels damaged and 3 destroyed. Galactic media drones captured everything, transmitting footage that would be analyzed and debated for generations. Across every civilized world, humanity had faced a combined military might of 47 elder species and won decisively, proving beyond any doubt that the balance of power had shifted permanently within days. Delegations began arriving from Council member species requesting private negotiations with human representatives. Suddenly very interested in establishing diplomatic relations, the Valorian Trade Consortium was first, their merchant guilds recognizing opportunity. When they saw it, we never truly supported the Exile, their ambassador claimed with practiced insincerity. Our government was pressured by the Theri Dominion into voting against our better judgment. Sarah Chen, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic officer, listened to these excuses with the patience her great-grandmother Victoria would have recognized. Your reasons for betraying us 200 years ago are less important than your choices moving forward, she told each delegation with identical phrasing. Humanity offers partnership to those willing to acknowledge our sovereignty and sign non-aggression pacts. We're not interested in subjugating anyone, but we won't tolerate threats. Species after species capitulated, signing treaties that acknowledged humanity's right to exist as equals rather than subordinates. The Council's authority crumbling as member governments pursued independent foreign policies. High Chancellor Vorath watched his carefully maintained order dissolve in real time. Unable to comprehend how everything had collapsed so completely, we gave them civilization, he complained to his advisors. His 3 heads unable to accept responsibility for catastrophic miscalculation, we offered them membership in the greatest alliance ever formed, and they've destroyed everything out of spite and arrogance. His chief advisor, emboldened by the obvious failure of Council policy, spoke truth that Vorath needed to hear. We imprisoned them for being different, for asking questions and pursuing knowledge. We had forbidden because it threatened our control. They didn't destroy our civilization. They revealed that it was already dying from stagnation and fear dressed up as wisdom. The Thari Dominion formally withdrew from the Council 3 months after Kepler, followed by the Valorian Consortium and then a cascade of defections that left 5 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler Nebula shattered the old order and scattered its fragments across a galaxy, learning to breathe free from ancient chains, disguised as protective guidance Earth. S-orbital space had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a diplomatic nexus where 47 former Council species now maintain embassies alongside dozens of younger civilizations eager to participate in governance. The Confederation of Free Worlds met in chambers built from materials donated by member species, each contributing their unique architectural styles to create something beautiful and collaborative. Ambassador Victoria Chun sat in the observation gallery, her body kept alive by longevity treatments developed during the Long Dark. Technologies the Council had suppressed because extending lifespan meant populations that remembered grievances at 237 years old. She had lived to see humanity banished, isolated, evolved, and ultimately triumphant in ways that younger generations struggled to comprehend her. Great-great-granddaughter Sarah Chun stood at the main podium addressing the inaugural Confederation Assembly, elected Secretary General by unanimous vote of all participating species. We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, not as elder species and younger civilizations, but as equals committed to building something better than what came before, Sarah declared. Her words transmitted to every member world. The assembly chamber filled with beings from across known space. Species that had evolved in environments ranging from crushing gravity to vacuum. All of them listening to a human explain how the galaxy would function going forward. The Council's greatest failure wasn't simply banishing humanity, Sarah continued, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. Their failure was believing that maintaining order required suppressing innovation, that protecting civilization meant preventing change. That wisdom came from age rather than adaptability. Former High Chancellor Varath sat in the Cathari delegation section, stripped of his titles and authority, attending as an observer rather than a power broker. His three heads hung in what might have been shame or simply exhaustion from watching everything he had built crumble into irrelevant Sarah's next words were directed at him specifically, though she never looked his way or mentioned him by name. We don't seek revenge against those who wronged us. We seek to ensure that no species ever again faces exile for the crime of being different or asking uncomfortable questions. The Confederation Charter had been drafted over 3 years of intensive negotiation, incorporating principles that balanced freedom with responsibility. Innovation with safety technology restrictions were lifted except for weapons designed purely for extinction-level destruction. Even those could be researched under strict oversight by committees representing diverse perspectives. Species could pursue whatever developmental path suited their nature and circumstances. Biological enhancement or artificial intelligence or quantum manipulation or any combination thereof. The Council maintained order through fear and limitation. Dr. James Okoncho explained during his presentation on the new framework. The Confederation maintains stability through transparency and mutual benefit. Every member species has equal voice regardless of age or achievement. The former Council species struggled initially with the concept of equality. Millennia of hierarchy and precedence had made them comfortable with stratified power structures. The Cathari Dominion's new ambassador, a younger member of Varath species who had studied human philosophy during the Exile period, spoke during the ratification debate. My people are learning that wisdom doesn't automatically come with age, she admitted, her three heads moving in patterns that suggested humility. Humanity taught us that necessity drives innovation more effectively than comfortable stagnation ever could. The Valorian Trade Consortium had transformed most dramatically, their merchant guilds eagerly adopting human economic models that emphasize mutual prosperity over zero-sum competition. Our profits have increased 40% since opening full trade with human markets, their representative reported with barely concealed enthusiasm. Turns out that having customers who can actually afford your products works better than maintaining artificial scarcity. Universities throughout human space found themselves flooded with applications from alien students seeking education in fields the council had restricted or forbidden. Entirely. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now director of the Sol System Institute of Advanced Sciences, reviewed admission requests from species whose governments had once voted to exile humanity. We're accepting them, she told her staff during the selection committee meeting. Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded as weapon against potential rivals. The integration proceeded faster than anyone had predicted. Younger generations of every species growing up in a galaxy where humans weren't monsters or cautionary tales, but simply neighbors with different approaches. Admiral Sarah Volkov retired from military service to lead the Confederation's exploration initiative, organizing joint expeditions to regions beyond the old Council's explored boundaries. The galaxy is vast and we've barely scratched its surface, she announced during the mission briefing for the first joint expedition. The Council spent 50,000 years maintaining what they had instead of discovering what might be possible. The expedition fleet consisted of vessels from 20 different species, their crews working together using protocols developed by human organizational psychologists who understood how to blend diverse perspectives. Former enemies served side by side on ships designed collaboratively, incorporating the best elements of each species' engineering traditions. The mission discovered 7 new civilizations in their first year, all of them welcomed into the Confederation as equals rather than subjects to be controlled. Victoria Chun watched the departure ceremony from her apartment overlooking Geneva, the city rebuilt from its role as survival bunker into cultural center, celebrating humanity's journey. A knock at her door brought Sarah to visit. A great-great-granddaughter making time despite overwhelming responsibilities to check on family. How does it feel? Sarah asked, settling into the chair beside Victoria's window overlooking the Restoration Gardens. Knowing that your final words to the Council came true, that they did regret making enemies of us. Victoria smiled with satisfaction that had mellowed over centuries into something approaching peace. They didn't just regret making us enemies, she replied, gesturing toward the news feeds showing Confederation activities. They learned that trying to control the future only ensures you won't be part of it. The conversation drifted to family matters and shared memories. The comfortable talk of people who had survived impossible odds together. Sarah eventually asked the question that had been bothering her since the Confederation's founding. Do you think we're making the same mistakes they did? Just in different forms. Victoria considered carefully before responding, her centuries of experience providing perspective. The difference is that we're building systems designed to be challenged and changed. We're not claiming our way is the only correct path. If some new species emerges tomorrow with ideas that contradict everything we've established, we've committed to listening rather than suppressing. The commitment was tested 6 months later when the Synthesis Collective made contact. Beings that existed as pure information distributed across quantum networks. Their existence violated every Council prohibition on merging consciousness with artificial systems. But the Confederation welcomed them and learned from their unique perspectives. Trade routes established by the Council over millennia were reorganized for efficiency rather than control, cutting travel times and costs while opening markets that had been restricted. Economic prosperity followed as younger species could finally compete fairly with elder civilizations that no longer enjoyed artificial advantages. Crime and conflict declined as the resource scarcity that had motivated much galactic tension evaporated under collaborative abundance. Not everything went smoothly. Old prejudices and cultural misunderstandings still cause friction between species learning to see each other as equals. The Rigelian sovereignty nearly withdrew from the Confederation during a trade dispute with human colonies. But mediation protocols resolved the issue before it escalated. "We're learning," Sarah Chun told the Assembly during her annual address. "We're making mistakes and correcting them, adapting and improving, doing exactly what the Council said couldn't work." Former High Chancellor Vareth requested permission to address the Assembly during its 5th anniversary session, a request that generated controversy among members who remembered the Exile. Victoria Chun argued for allowing him to speak. Despite personal reasons to deny him any platform, let him say his piece, she insisted during the procedural debate. "Hearing from those who opposed us helps ensure we don't become them." Vareth approached the podium slowly, his age showing in ways that longevity treatments could only partially address. "I come before you without authority or power, a relic of a system that should have evolved centuries ago," he began, his 3 voices speaking with rare unity. "I voted to exile humanity because I feared what they represented. Change that threatened the comfortable order I had maintained for so long." The chamber fell silent as the architect of humanity's greatest trauma spoke.